Jai Bhim and greetings from Nagpur, India. And I'm extremely delighted to share my presentation on Babasaheb Ambedkar's theory of karma. Before I proceed on to deliver some of the key points of the paper that I submitted, I would like to thank Uday for introducing me to Rima long back. And I'm very delighted to see Professor Jonathan Gold, whose book Paving the Way, based on Vasubandhu's philosophy, has been a great work. And I was happy to contact him a long time back. And also Divya for writing a wonderful book on how the castes are formed, along with the identity of Hinduism in her very path-breaking book, The Merchants of Virtue, and my dear friend, Professor Santosh Raut. So before I begin with the main topic today, I would like to talk about for some time on how Babasaheb Ambedkar had contributed to the democratization of country, that is India, and his concern for a long time was to establish democracy in India. We can likewise term him as somebody who has played a leading role in making India a democracy. And if we look into his writings and his speeches on democracy, we can get a very multidimensional understanding of the concept and the practices of democracy. Before India became a democratic republic in 1950, when the constitution came into force, which Babasaheb Ambedkar drafted, in 1941, he made a very remarkable statement about Buddhism and democracy. And he said that if India would like to go forward with democracy, they have to forego the mythological characters and embrace the Buddha. And he says that the people in India should chant the greatest of the mantra, the Maha Mantra of the Buddhang Saranam Gacchami, Dhammang Saranam Gacchami, and Sangam Saranam Gacchami. This is in 1941. And I'm going to present the idea of the karma in Baba Sahib's writings and speeches with the goal to create some of the points to develop the theory of karma. As Baba Ambedkar has raised four important questions in the beginning of the Buddha and his Dhamma. One of the questions was related to the karma and rebirth. And I'm going to quote straight away from his book, The Buddha and his Dhamma. So here what he says. The third problem relates to the doctrines of soul, of karma and rebirth. The Buddha denied the existence of the soul, but he is also said to have affirmed the doctrine of karma and rebirth. At once a question arises. If there is no soul, how can there be karma? If there is no soul, how can there be rebirth? These are baffling questions. In what sense did the Buddha use the words karma and rebirth? Did he use them in a different sense than the sense in which they were used by the Brahmins of his day? If so, in what sense? Did he use them in the same sense in which the Brahmins used them? If so, is there not a terrible contradiction between the denial of the soul and the affirmation of karma and rebirth? This contradiction needs to be resolved. So you see that Baba Ambedkar denied the Brahminical theory of karma, which is based on rebirth. And in this book, he has also shown how the teachings or the law of karma can be expressed without resorting to the theory of rebirth. And Baba Ambedkar found that this theory of rebirth or incarnation of the soul is a stumbling block in the way of making a society a democratic society. And this is what he says about this democracy and the contradiction between the law of karma and rebirth propounded by the Brahmins. He says in another very interesting quotation, the fundamental principle of the modern democratic state is the recognition of the value of the individual. and the belief that each individual has but one life. Full opportunity should be accorded to each to attain his maximum development in that life. Neither of these propositions be said to form the part of the accepted philosophy of the aristocracy of India, that is Brahmanism. Brahmins. They rather hold that the present life is for each only one of a series of existences. That the position of each individual in this life has been determined for him by his merits and demerits in his previous births. And that therefore no character, howsoever high, no ability, howsoever great, which a man may have to his credit, can alter his place in the social strata in which he is born. With the aristocracy, the notion that a man born a Brahmin cannot be other than a Brahmin, and a man born a pariah cannot be other than a pariah, is no idle talk. It is a living and operative faith. To give unrestricted power in the hands of the people of this sort is to arm the hangman with a knife. So we see that how in the present context today, these doctrines of justification for one's poverty, one's social strata has been attributed to one's past life and past karma. And this sort of doctrine, according to Babasaheb Ambedkar, is like arming the hangman with a knife. So, whenever we are talking about the theory of karma, we have to be very careful as to the theory of karma that we are expounding justifies the injustice, justifies the poverty, justifies the casteism, and justifies racism and gender discrimination. And with this background, we can look at the theory of karma, which Babasaheb Ambedkar himself wanted to, propound. And I think we are at the stage where we can look into how Babasaheb Ambedkar conceived the theory of karma. So, my presentation is not new in this sense. Long before, in 1974, the great professor, the Japanese professor, Professor Genjun Sasaki, in the Ambedkarian revival of Buddhism in relation to various Asian countries, published in the Buddhist Sovereign on the occasion of the Third Asian Buddhist Conference, has made this very interesting statement. A theory of karma was inclined to be interpreted as determinism, as we see that the Brahmanical theory of the karma is based on this deterministic concept. Such elements as occupation, poverty, and human virtues, and we can extend it to casteism, racism, and gender discrimination, were considered as predestined by karma. But this notion is to be changed and transformed. A theory of karma should be pointed towards the development of the character of the individual, emphasizing effort of individual act in accordance with the demand of modern society. And this is what Babasaheb Ambedkar does when he talks about the uh, theory of karma, particular law of karma, in the context of how we can make the individuals responsible towards the social transformation. And there are many views about what constitute Buddhism, what the Buddha taught, what are the fundamental teachings of the Buddha. I think there cannot be any doubt that the Buddha, destroyed all the notions that differentiates between the two human beings. And as we know that one of the fundamental teachings of the Buddha was the human equality. And some people, call it a radical equality that the Buddha taught. And we know, like in the Buddhist texts, we can see how the Buddha denounced the justification of the Brahmins, that some people are born high and some people are born low based on the karma. The Buddha said in the Vasala Sutta very categorically that na jaccha kammano hoti, na jaccha hoti brahmano. Nobody is born a Vassala or an outcast, or nobody is born a Brahmin by the birth. Kammuna vassaloti, kammuna hoti brahmano. By their karma, they are born. They are not born. They are the vassalas or the Brahmins. And in the same Vassala Sutta, Buddha goes on enlisting the different professions and how their professions designate them certain social names. So we know that the Buddha has not talked the karma, the particular in the context of the caste as arising from the birth, but because they are designated, people are designated differently because of their vocations. And Baba Ambedkar has delinked the rebirth from the karma, and I think that's very important. To understand the theory of karma as propounded in the writings of Babasaheb Ambedkar, we have to look at the goal of Babasaheb Ambedkar's life and mission, that was to end the social suffering, that was to end the uh, you know, uh, structural sort of uh, the structures in the society that creates a lot of suffering, and towards that aim to create a more equal, a more free, and more just society, Baba Sahib Ambedkar's life was dedicated. And today, his legacy continues. He's a most often quoted person in India today. His statues outnumber the statues of the Gandhi and Nehru taken together. And in every debate, whether it's a parliament or in the newspaper, he is, being quoted. And he was very widely read. It's very difficult to pin him down in any framework, whether it's liberalism or conservatism. Very difficult to pin him down. And as we know that now he is being talked as a pragmatist, but his pragmatism was like, as a philosophy, as a responsibility of the individuals towards the society, towards the world. And in that context, he can be called the responsible philosopher. And we know that Buddhism has played a very important role in his life as early as, in 1906. He has declared himself as a Buddhist. He was so much influenced by the Buddha. He later told Rahul Walapolo that he was a Buddhist at the age of 16, and he has publicly made a comment on that, in the speech at Nagpur, that he was a Buddhist very early on. And I have gone through a lot of the books, his libraries in Milian College and Siddharth College, and I've seen firsthand his vast reading of the Buddhist texts, right from the Pali Tripitakas to the Tibetan and the philosophical books on Buddhism, and a lot of things in his collections that we can even see today. He was the master of Pali language. He attempted to write a Pali dictionary in the four languages, and he was also very active in the international Buddhist world. He had now we know that people like D.T. Suzuki had visited his Mahavidyalaya, Milian College, and there were now a lot of things we can glean from there as to how he was involved internationally. So, to coming back to this very important topic, that the theory of karma that Baba Ambedkar, envisioned is basically, in the context of the democracy, as I would say in the today's idiom that is so prevalent, that is democracy, and that was one of the goals of Baba Ambedkar's life, to establish democracy, not just a parliamentary political democracy. His aim was to deeply, entrench what he termed as the social democracy. And social democracy, according to Baba Ambedkar, is based on the principle of one human being, one value, not just one human being, one vote. And he says that the foundation of the social democracy as respect and reverence to a fellow human being can be found in the teachings of the Buddha, particularly in the teaching of the myth, which can be translated as I am, so they are. And from this very foundation, the social democracy can come into being. And once there is a social democracy in any society, it's very easy to have economic and political democracy. And Baba Ambedkar says that the roots of the social philosophy lies in Buddha's teaching of the liberty, equality, and fraternity. And this is a very interesting topic that we can go into, but I'm not going to go into that. But suffice here to put before you that the Buddhism has so much to offer in terms of democracy and democratization of the societies, which is particularly the social democracy. So, interestingly, Baba Saheb Ambedkar also linked the Buddha's Dhamma to the perfect justice. And and when we look at this whole background from which we are coming to talk about the theory of karma, uh, I think it's very interesting to look at the traditional Buddhist point of view, which is sort of in most cases imbued with the karma attached with rebirths in the hells and heavens. And one of the ways by which we can understand this fascination, linking of karma with the rebirth, the hells and the heavens, and of course the human realm, as if you do good, you will be born in the future in some hell or in some heaven. If you do bad, you will be born in some hell. And depending on the degrees of your karma, you will be born in the different levels of hells and heavens. So Baba Ambedkar denied that, and he says, as we have seen, that the Buddha talks about the karma in this life itself, as to how do we act now, how do we respond to the world of suffering, how we respond to the cries of the other people. In other words, how do we maintain the moral order? And I think the teaching of the moral order that we can see in Babasaheb's writings is very interesting. He says that, and I'm going to read it, that in the Buddhist terminology, these are called the niyamas, laws which produce an orderly sequence such as rutuniyam and bijniyam. And also he talks about the karmaniyam or kamaniyam. And he says that how the Buddha gave to the question, the answer the Buddha gave to the question, how is moral order maintained? And his answer is this. His answer was simple. It is the Kamma and not God which maintains the moral order in the universe. That was the Buddha's answer to the question. The moral order of the universe may be good or it may be bad, but according to the Buddha, the moral order rests on man and on nobody else. Kamma means man's action and vipaka is its effect. If the moral order is bad, it is because man does akusala, bad karma. If the moral order is good, it is because man does kusala karma. The Buddha was not content with merely speaking of karma. He spoke of the law of Kamma, which is another name for Kammaniyam. By speaking of the law of Kamma, what the Buddha wanted to convey was that the effect of the deed was bound to follow the deed, as surely as night follows day. It was like a niyam or rule. No one could fail to benefit by the good effects of a kusala kamma, and no one could escape the evil effect of kusala kamma. Therefore, the Buddha's admonition was do kusala kamma so that humanity may benefit by a good moral order which a kusala kamma helps to sustain. Do not do a kusala kamma, for humanity will suffer from the bad moral order which an akusala kamma will bring about. And this is what Baba Ambedkar says. Further, the theory of the law of karma does not necessarily involve the conception that the effect of the karma recoils on the doer of it and there is nothing more to be thought about it. This is an error. Sometimes the action of one affects another instead of the doer. All the same, it is the working of the law of karma because it either upholds or upsets the moral order. Individuals come and individuals go, but the moral order of the universe remains, and so also the law of karma which sustains it. It is for this reason that in the religion of the Buddha, morality or ethics in today's parlance has been given the place of God. Thus, the Buddha's answer to the question how the moral order in the universe is sustained is so simple and so irrefutable, and its true meaning is scarcely grasped. Often, almost always, it is either misunderstood or misstated or misinterpreted. Not many seems to be conscious that the law of karma was propounded by the Buddha as an answer to the question how the order is maintained. This, however, is the purpose of Buddha's law of karma. The law of karma has to do only with the question of general moral order. It has nothing to do with the fortunes or misfortunes of an individual. It is concerned with the maintenance of the moral order in the universe. It is because of this that the law of karma is a part of Dhamma. And I think this is very interesting quotation that we have just read from Babasaheb's Buddha and his Dhamma. And and therefore, I think this theory of karma that we are now trying to look at is very interesting. And if we go deep into this, what are the practices? Like we know that Buddhism is often looked at some kind of an individualistic religion where you meditate, you try to purify your mind, you try to attain the higher states, the jhanic states. All that is okay, but according to Baba Ambedkar, everything has to be taken in the context of the Buddha's overall goal, that is Bahujan Hitai, Bahujan Sukhai. And Bahujan Sukhai ultimately means the positive moral order, which depends on our own sort of actions, the actions of the human beings. And if we extend this particular theory further, then the immoral orders like casteism, racism, gender discrimination, even I would term nationalism and fascism, are not divinely ordained, but are created by the actions of the people in the world, and by the actions of the people only they can be undone, isn't it? And does the Buddhist idea of karma is an action in the world to reform the minds and reform the mind of the world for the welfare of the larger public. So I would like to try in the end the law of karma to the formulation of dukkha by Babasaheb Ambedkar. We know that Babasaheb Ambedkar also questioned the traditional formulation of the dukkha. And I'm not going to go much into that, but I'm going to talk about one of the categories in which Babasaheb Ambedkar looked at the dukkha. Of course, he talked about the personal dukkha that arises due to one's bad conduct, but also he talked about the social dukkha, and it's the samajik dukkha, the social dukkha. And social dukkha is of course related with the structure, or the structures of caste, the social structures of racism, the social structure of gender discrimination. And in this particular context, the intervention of the human beings is very important as to how we can destroy this social sufferings. And in the Buddha's teachings also we can find similar sort of formulation of the Paticca Samutpad, particularly in the Madhupindak Sutta, as to how the social strife arises depending on the identities that people identify themselves with particular group based on their trishna, based on their desires. And that's how the Buddha shows how the social strife, social suffering arises. So I think in the end, we have to look at also the quote unquote the theory of the dukkha, and based on this theory of the dukkha, we can also begin to make sense of the theory of karma. And as we know that Babasaheb Ambedkar is not just about theorization; he's of course using all the ideas as a plan of action to make the world a better place. To end here, what would be the position of Abhidhamma and meditation in this context? Because we know that the Abhidhamma is full of, the different categorizations of the hells and the heavens, the doctrine of the Loki, or the world, and beyond world. And this can be very well understood in the social context as well. But Baba Ambedkar emphasized the presentation of Buddhism in terms of its social and political implication. That was a time, even today's time is full of strife in the world. That was a time when Buddhism was, totally attacked from the doctrines which were sort of proposing violence as a means for transformation. And Babasaheb Ambedkar was pointing out to the Buddhist countries at time that if they look deeply into the teachings of the Buddha, they can have more important, methods to transform the world. And from this point of view, we can look at the entire teachings of the Abhidhamma and meditation. Of course, Babasaheb Ambedkar didn't deny the Samma Samadhi, and he has put the samadhi in the context of the larger goal of Bahujan Hitai and Bahujan Sukhai, which in the today's parlance we can say the true democratization, the social democratization of the communities. So before I end, I would like to quote something which is very interesting that I just recently found out, that Babasaheb Ambedkar has highlighted a very important quotation from the Bodhicharya avatar from Shantidev, quoted in Lubak's aspect of Buddhism, and the four vows of Bodhisattva that talks about vows of liberating the innumerable human beings. And this particular paragraphs, I think, in a way captures the heart of Babasaheb's life and mission. And this is so apt today when we are thinking about the karma, the theory of karma, particularly in the context of a word which doesn't differentiate human beings based on any attributes. There are no jatis among the human beings. That's what the Buddha taught, and there is no basis for any racial discrimination in Buddhism, as attested by so many evidences in the archaeological sites, where you see people from so many different races coming together and supporting the Buddha's Dhamma. In the Indian Ajanta, you can see people from various races, and this quote is particularly very interesting from the theory of karma point of view. I quote, "If the suffering of many is brought to an end by the suffering of one, the one should foster this suffering in himself by means of compassion. The Bodhisattvas, finding their joy in smoothing away the sorrows of others, descend into hell as swans swoop into a clump of lotus flowers. The deliverance of creatures is for them an ocean of joy, drowning everything else. What is the value of a half-hearted deliverance? Have one passion only, the good of others. All who are unhappy from having sought their own happiness. If we are too much focused on ourselves, we will ultimately, be unhappy. All who are happy from having sought the happiness of others. You must exchange your well-being for the miseries of others." So I think this particular bodhisattva vow, or the actions of bodhisattva, bodhicharya, encapsulate the bodhi karma that we all need to be committed to in order to make this world peaceful, more egalitarian, more conducive to the happiness and welfare of the public. I think that was the aspiration of Babasaheb Ambedkar and of all the bodhisattvas of the past, present, and the future. And I think this is the valid basis to construct the theory of karma the way Babasaheb Ambedkar wanted to develop the theory of karma. Thank you so much. Jai Bhim. Namo Buddhaya.